Now, another cold spell coupled with snow swept across Korea over the weekend, causing flights to be suspended again on the southern island of Jeju. Jeju International Airport halted flights between 6:35 a.m. and 8 a.m. on Monday, cancelling around 6 flights heading to Seoul. Several flights have also been delayed as airport staff work to remove snow off the runways. The airport is currently under wind shear and heavy snowfall warnings, and nearly 270 flights were delayed on Sunday, and this stranded hundreds of people on the island as well. An airport official advised travellers to check their flights before heading to the airport, as further delays are expected with heavy snow forecast until Tuesday.
To the weather, and there is a storm brewing just as we begin the weekend in the plains in the Midwest. It'll then move east. This morning, take a look. Heavy lake effect snow triggering a massive pileup on I-94. That's in Hartford, Michigan. That new winter storm on the move tomorrow. The Northeast bracing for it by the end of the weekend. Rob Marciano with us live again tonight, tracking it all for us. Hey, Rob.
Hey, David, the cold has settled back in. Right now, the wind chill where I stand is 5 degrees. And look at these numbers in the morning. That's about the story. It'll be 7 below in Boston, 9 degrees in Chicago. Not a whole lot happening with this system tomorrow. Maybe the northern part in the Great Lakes, the snow starts to fly. The southern part in the southeast, heavier rain in through Atlanta. I-95 on Sunday, mostly rain, but north and west, a good swath of 1 to 3 inches of snow. New England, Cincinnati, back through Chicago, half a foot around the lakes. And there you go, Super Bowl in Minneapolis, minus 17 for a wind chill. That is cold stuff. David?
That's for sure. Rob Marciano, good to see you again tonight.
Record-breaking snowfall in Moscow over the weekend led to canceled flights and power outages from fallen trees. About 55 centimeters of snow had accumulated in the city by Monday, February 5th. The Russian capital hit its entire monthly snowfall average by Saturday, and the snow kept on falling into Sunday. This beats Moscow's previous record for snowfall set in 1957. Local media are calling it the snowfall of the century. 1 person died and at least 5 were injured by toppled trees. More than 40,000 households lost power after trees also fell on electrical lines. Soldiers were ordered to help clean up the streets while authorities deployed plow vehicles. School for many children was declared optional on Monday when temperatures reached just minus 12 degrees Celsius. This isn't the only extreme weather record recently set in Moscow. In December, the city experienced the least amount of sunshine in a single month. For United News International, I'm Cambry Caldwell.
Hospital emergency rooms across the country are inundated with sneezing, coughing, sniffling patients. In Atlanta, Georgia, Grady Memorial Hospital opened a temporary mobile emergency room, enclosed in plastic tents, to handle a 25% increase in visits in the month of January.
The flu this year has been dangerous. Our volume in the emergency department has reached such a critical number, and not only us, but our inpatient colleagues. We really need to bring in an additional resource. The very old and the very young are the group that tend to be in the most danger from catching the flu.
It is a cesspool of flu, a cesspool of funky flu at the ER right now.
In Florida, one tired nurse posted this now viral video after working a 12-hour shift.
Watch this. I'm going to teach y'all a magic trick. It's amazing. Achoo!
Her advice is simple. Cover your mouth when you sneeze or cough, wash your hands, and avoid bringing healthy people to the emergency room. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control says the hospitalization rate for flu is at an all-time high this year, with 49 of the 50 U.S. states reporting widespread flu activity. Still, the scale of this outbreak is dwarfed by one which occurred 100 years ago this month, one of the deadliest in history. In 1918, Spanish influenza spread around the globe in the aftermath of World War I. Over a period of 2 years, it killed tens of millions of people globally, including 675,000 in the United States alone. This flu strain may not be as deadly, but the National Institute of Health is still advising Americans to get a vaccine, even though a Canadian study found it was less than 20% effective.
We should point out that even though the vaccine is less than optimal in its efficacy, that the small to moderate amount of protection you get against influenza by getting vaccinated is always better than no protection at all by not getting vaccinated. That's very clear.
With as many as 10 more weeks left to this flu season, U.S. healthcare workers are looking for all the help they can get. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera.
Isa Sharif says some of his family members were killed in the war in neighboring Syria. He has also lost contact with others who have been displaced. Lebanon has been his home for 6 years. He is from the opposition-held province of Idlib, and for him, going back is not an option.
We want a safe zone to return to. Otherwise, where do they want us to go back to? Do they want us to die? If we go back, we will be bombarded. There's nowhere safe. There's only death.
Idlib is a de-escalation zone. There is supposed to be a ceasefire here. Instead, civilians are being killed in almost daily airstrikes by Syrian and Russian planes. Humanitarian agencies say the violence in some parts of Syria means it's still not safe for refugees to return. They are warning governments in Europe, the United States, and the region not to force them back.
We, the AIDS humanitarian organizations that are on the ground in Syria and in the neighboring countries, we call this report Dangerous Grounds, for the simple reason that these women, children and men have to be informed of conditions, and we have to assure that it is voluntary when they go back, and then we have to assist and protect the return.
The UN doesn't have exact numbers, but the figures available show some 70,000 refugees returned on their own from neighboring countries last year. But aid agencies say for every returnee, there were 3 more newly displaced because of the violence. Since mid-December, more than 200,000 people had to leave their homes because of fighting in the southern edges of Idlib province. Pro-Syrian government forces control the main cities. They've recaptured a lot of territory from the opposition. ISIL has been pushed out of many areas, and there are local ceasefire agreements in place. But the picture is misleading. There are many areas where fighting continues. It's not just safety. There is widespread destruction. There are few civilian facilities left. Hospitals have been hit. Mass returns can't be sustainable if these people can't find jobs and if there is no health care or schools.
There are no proper living conditions. Imagine if I need to take my children to a doctor. There are no health centers. There is no life there. I'm afraid of the day when they kick us out of here.
Lebanon's government says there will be no forced returns, and any returns will be coordinated with the United Nations. But refugees here are still worried. So are aid agencies. That is why they are warning no one should be forced back to Syria without a plan that takes into account their safety and well-being. Zana Khudr, Al Jazeera, Bekaa Valley, Lebanon.
Children in this remote part of Papua in eastern Indonesia are dying of disease and hunger. A measles outbreak is claiming lives, infecting children's bodies weak from malnutrition. Decades ago, the Asmat people were proud and feared warriors, well known for headhunting and cannibalism. Those traditions have now gone and only on display in museums. But the rest of the tribe's unique culture is also in danger of being lost.
Our culture must not disappear. We have abolished bad traditions and are focused on the good parts of our culture. We used to like killing and eating people. That was clearly not a good sign of our culture. But our sculptures, our cultural festivals, we need to protect them. They can't disappear. The bad things have been taken by the winds.
Modern-day goods have replaced what nature used to provide in the jungle. Instant noodles and ice cream are on the menu instead of baked sago. Forests are no longer a source for food. City-style garbage is seen everywhere.
Here it becomes painfully clear how a unique culture is rapidly disappearing. Instead of sago trees, plastic waste dominates the habitat of the Asmat people. Many say it's a sign that Indonesia needs to act fast if it wants to maintain its diversity and preserve this centuries-old culture.
Because of the lack of good nutrition, diseases spread quickly. Many children have died because medical posts in remote areas are unmanned. Church leaders estimate the figure could be in the hundreds.
We have to realize that this tragedy is a very important lesson to us. It shows how we have failed our brothers and sisters and not managed to bring welfare and health care to them. It shows that a lot has to be done.
Church workers provide information to villagers about healthy food, but proper education facilities are seriously lacking. We visited a school with only one teacher present. The head of the school had not shown up for work for 4 years. The government admits its approach has failed.
What we found is that the services we provided were not enough. They did not reach the right people and were not effective, or it was the wrong approach altogether. Now we are discussing with several ministries to see what is the best approach that suits their culture and level of development.
President Joko Widodo suggested relocating the more than 100,000 members of the Asmat tribe to a town, but that was immediately rejected. The government now says it aims to preserve the Asmat culture and provide the medical care and assistance needed for the Asmat people to survive on the land they have always known. Step Fasten, Al Jazeera, Agats, Papua.
Another night of Russian air raids across Syria's northern Idlib province. On Sunday, rescue workers in the town of Kafr Nubal rushed to put out fires and dig through rubble in the search for survivors. In the provincial capital, Idlib city, one witness said a 5-story building was leveled and at least 15 people were feared dead. Several other deaths and dozens of injuries have been reported across the province. In the city of Marat al-Numan, civil defense workers rushed babies and other patients out of a damaged hospital. In December, the Syrian army, backed by Iranian militia and Russian air power, launched a major offensive to retake Idlib. It's Syria's last and most densely populated province, still mainly under opposition control. Russian jets have intensified their strikes on Idlib after Syrian militia shot down a Russian warplane on Saturday and killed its pilot. Russia says it is targeting Islamist militants, not civilians.
On February 3rd, militants shot down a Su-25 warplane of the Russian Airspace Forces with a man-portable air defense system Manpad over the village of Khan al-Sabil, southwest of the city of Sarakib in the province of Idlib. Originally, Jaish al-Nasr, a militant group that had been supplied with US-made Tau anti-tank missiles, claimed that its members had downed the warplane. Later, the media wing of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda, released a video of the Manpad launch. This confirmed that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS members were involved in the attack. The Su-25 pilot ejected, but was killed in a fighting on the ground. The militants were not able to capture him alive. According to the Russian media, the pilot identified as Major Roman Filipov. He was a former Ukrainian pilot from the city of Simferopol, in what is now the Russian Republic of Crimea. On the same day, Russian airspace forces delivered a series of high-precision weapon strikes on the area from which the Manpad was launched, and killed at least 30 militants, according to the country's defense ministry. On February 4th, over 70 Russian airstrikes hit positions of the HTS and its allies. According to the Russian MP Viktor Volodarsky, Syrian and Russian forces are working to trace the Manpad missile and to find how exactly it had appeared in the hands of the militants. The Idlib incident took place while the Syrian Arab Army SAA and other pro-government factions were focusing on combating ISIS in northeastern Hama. Government forces liberated the villages of Al-Judaidah, Samiriya, Huriza, Tulayhat, Abu Qusur, and Ma'asaran. HTS, the Turkish Islamic Party TAP, and their allies used the situation to launch a large-scale attack on SA positions in eastern Idlib on February 4th. By February 5th, they had entered Tel Sultan, Ras Al Ain, and Baris. The main fighting took place in Tel Sultan, where 25 militants were reportedly killed by the target forces. The situation on the front line remains tense. On February 3rd, 7 soldiers of the Turkish Armed Forces TAF were killed in clashes with the Kurdish militias. 5 soldiers died near the settlement of Sheikh Haruz, northeast of the YPG-held city of Afrin, where Kurdish forces targeted a TAF battle tank. 1 more soldier died in a separate incident in the Afrin area. Another one was killed in the Turkish border province of Kilis. It is interesting to note that Ankara continues arguing that Turkish forces fight some mysterious ISIS terrorists in the Afrin area. However, for all neutral observers, it is clear that there is no ISIS in Afrin. On February 4th, the TAF and the Free Syrian Army entered the villages of Haj Bilal and Sheikh Haruz. YPG-YPJ forces repelled Turkish-led attack on the villages of Blika and Shakwarzi, where they had reportedly destroyed a bulldozer of Turkey-led forces. Reports also appeared that Faylaq al-Sham, the Free Idlib Army, and the Nur al-Din al-Zanki movement had sent their fighters to participate in Ankara's Operation Olive Branch in Afrin. If this is confirmed, soon the YPG-YPJ will face an additional pressure on the ground.
Our top story for this half-hour: Turkey has warned American soldiers in Syria of the possibility of being treated as terrorists if they keep backing Kurdish YPG militants. Talking to media, Deputy Prime Minister Bekir Bozdağ threatened to expand Ankara's operation to the town of Manbij and even east of the Euphrates River if the YPG did not withdraw. He went on to say that U.S. soldiers risk being caught up in clashes, and the Turkish forces would not make a distinction if Americans appear in YPG uniforms. Bozdağ was referring to past images of U.S. troops in northern Syria with YPG insignia.
The Pentagon has unveiled a new plan to diversify its nuclear arsenal and develop new, smaller atomic bombs to counter Russia's growing nuclear power. On February 2nd, the Defense Department presented the new policy suggestion in what's known as the Nuclear Posture Review, the Pentagon's first nuclear review in 8 years. It argues that Moscow views U.S. nuclear weapons as too big to be used, making them no longer an effective deterrent. The Pentagon argued that developing smaller nukes would challenge that assumption. President Donald Trump applauded the new policy, saying that previous administrations had deferred much-needed modernization, while other nations had increased their nuclear stockpiles. China, in response, said it firmly opposed the Pentagon's nuclear policy review. For United News International in Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
Moscow has condemned the, quote, bellicose and anti-Russian nature of the new U.S. nuclear policy that calls for developing new, smaller nukes. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov expressed deep concern about the strategy, calling it confrontational. He warned that his country will take necessary measures to ensure Russia's security. China's defense ministry has also slammed the U.S. for portraying Beijing as a potential nuclear adversary in its nuclear strategy review. The Pentagon released a document on Friday. It contains plans to revamp U.S. nuclear arsenal to diversify its options against potential enemies. In the summary of the nuclear review, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis named China and North Korea as potential threats. He also noted that the focus of the program will be on countering Russia's nuclear activities.
The top nuclear envoys of South Korea and the United States met in Seoul on Monday to discuss North Korea's participation at the Winter Olympics here in South Korea and other issues concerning the Korean Peninsula. They said they were satisfied with how events were unfolding, but more needed to be done.
Our joint efforts to make the Pyeongchang Olympics an Olympic of peace are making good progress. With all this, I look forward to having in-depth discussion as to how to move from here beyond the Pyeongchang.
On Friday, I met with Unification Ministry officials. So we had good talks, and I think everyone was happy at the level of cooperation, collaboration between U.S. and South Korea leading up to the Games.
Seoul's foreign ministry said the two envoys pledged further cooperation with countries like Russia and China on dealing with North Korea and promised to continue working closely together to try and convince the rogue state to, quote, make the right choices. Later, Lee also held a phone conversation with his Japanese counterpart, where they also reiterated the need to continue efforts to bring North Korea back to meaningful dialogue.
The United States, with its 2018 nuclear posture review, has announced it is continuing to transform its nuclear weapons strategy in the face of increasing challenges.
This NPR responds to today's security needs with a tailored nuclear deterrent strategy and flexible capabilities for effective deterrence.
South Korea succeeded this week in bringing North Korean athletes to the upcoming Winter Olympics and reducing tensions. The U.S., however, has repeatedly threatened Pyongyang with preemptive war over its nuclear and missile programs.
It's a very tricky situation. We're going to find out how it goes, but we think the Olympics will go very nicely, and after that, who knows?
The U.S. recently sent more nuclear-capable aircraft to Guam as part of increasing rotational deployments to the region. North Korea Friday warned the U.S. its frequent military maneuvers and war games risk armed conflict.
If the hard-won atmosphere of improving inter-Korean relations and easing tensions is undermined due to the U.S. aggravating the situation by bringing nuclear war equipment in and around the Korean Peninsula, the U.S. would never escape from that responsibility.
Large-scale U.S.-South Korea military drills were put off until April.
The U.S. is determined for these military exercises to go on, and I think that South Korea has pretty well said that it too is going to go through with the exercises. It's during those exercises, before and during, that we'll really test the strength of the alliance and also the North Korean reaction, and also the American reaction at that time.
North Korea argues the annual U.S.-South Korea drills are a rehearsal for invasion. The United States has provided little support for the Olympics truce of ancient times with repeated threatening remarks and behavior, despite the Games set to begin in just a week. And indeed, we'll have to wait and see what effect the so-called Peace Olympics will have on the ongoing tensions surrounding the Korean Peninsula. Frank Smith, Press TV, Seoul.
Let's discuss the issue. Joining me from Beijing is author and columnist Einar Tangen. Good to have you with us, Einar. This is a union of concerned scientists is saying that the move increases the risk of a nuclear conflict. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason to be asking for low-yield nuclear tactical weapons unless you intend to use them. What's odd is that Donald Trump is using Russia and China as the excuse when it's far more likely that his targets are either North Korea or Iran.
And what about the other point is that the U.S. itself does not seem to care at all about nuclear disarmament. It hasn't signed treaties related to that. And then it is calling, Mr. Trump is calling as threats, Russia and China is calling them as nuclear threats.
Well, this has been one consistent theme from Donald Trump, is that he supports the military-industrial complex. Every country he has visited, he has sold weapons systems to or encouraged them to do so. He seems to believe that this is some way of restarting the American economy and getting some, quote, payback for America investments in security abroad. This runs counter to all, I think, rational belief that we need less conflict, less weapon systems, and certainly fewer nuclear weapons.
All right, I appreciate your comments and insights. Author and columnist Einar Tangen joining me from Beijing.
Let's begin tonight by recognizing that the state of our union is strong because our people are strong.
The theme of the State of the Union was building a safe, proud, and strong America. With the president touching on major issues he hopes will appeal to both parties, while touting his first-year accomplishments, like cutting back on government regulations and taxes.
And just as I promised the American people from this podium 11 months ago, we enacted the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history.
And addressing things both sides care about, like immigration reform and rebuilding America's infrastructure in its roads and bridges.
I'm calling on Congress to produce a bill that generates at least $1.5 trillion for the new infrastructure investment that our country so desperately needs.
But despite the president's best efforts to speak to the other side of the aisle, many times during the speech, more moderate Democratic senators like Joe Manchin were the only members of the party standing.
I have respect for the office, I really do. And just to sit there, it shows us I just wasn't raised that way. A lack of civility, a lack of respect.
Manchin says the president's speech was more bipartisan than he's heard in the past.
We're going to have to join, and he's put the olive branch out, and let's grab it and work together.
Following the speech, Republicans spoke highly of the president's address and his first year in office.
It was so inspiring. He talked about making America great again, as he did in the campaign.
What a remarkable year. Could anyone have ever predicted the outcomes of what's happened this year? Number one, we have the most pro-life president we've ever had.
And many were impressed with the president's promise to protect religious liberty in America and rely on God.
In America, we know that faith and family, not government and bureaucracy, are the center of American life. The motto is "In God We Trust."
Congressman Jody Hice, a former pastor, told CBN News he was moved by the president's commitment to God.
And it's very moving for me and refreshing to have a commander-in-chief speak with such boldness as to the foundation of our faith.
For the next several days, Republican lawmakers will meet with the president at the annual GOP retreat to put the policies he outlined into action as they look ahead to the 2018 midterm elections. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.